Hi, I'm Steve Moore of The Big Picture, and today I have a gentleman with me, and I'm honoured to have him here because this is a gentleman who really, when we talk about the subject of alien abduction, is a man who would actually come straight to mind, and that is the one and only Mr. Whitley Strieber. Mr. Whitley Strieber, thank you for joining me here.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
Now, tell me, I remember the last time I was with you at any conference was back in 1996 in Sheffield, Hallam
You've
University.
got a long memory.
I have, and that was around about the years of the alien autopsy footage was out.
Yes.
And I remember your lecture then, and it fascinated me. And when was the last time you were here lecturing?
I was at Devises at the Crop Circle Conference in 2009.
Right. And how often do you manage to get over to the UK? Not very often?
Well, quite often. I used to come to the UK every year, but then COVID interrupted that for 2 years, and now I'm coming again. I like the UK, and it's always been part of my life. And I lived here as a student in the 60s, and then just kept coming back, and now I've started coming back again. I'll be here for a month this time, and
Oh, right, it's a month.
back in April probably or May.
Right, fantastic.
yeah.
Well, what really interests me about your experiences, Whitley, is that, when we talk about people who have had those type of experiences, there usually is a short-lived information that is documented and put out to the world. It might have happened for a certain amount of years, but this is something that when you got into this and found out more, and in your investigative way, discovered that this hadn't been your first experiences when Communion came out. You'd had other experiences through the life. And I think that's what people discover when you could say, it was that through hypnosis that you managed to find that you had a little bit more of a connection with this phenomenon than you thought.
When I was first realized that something odd had happened to me, something that needed more investigation, I was asked by a UFO investigator, abduction investigator, Bud Hopkins,
Yes.
to be hypnotized, that he would hypnotize me. And I was very wary of this because I had, at the time, still the belief that I had been attacked criminally. And I had ended up with him because I had read a book that my brother had sent me called Science and the UFOs by Jenny Randalls. And it had a description in it that sounded uncannily like what had happened to me, what I remembered. And so I thought to myself, I'll ask this man what he knows about this. But when I went to see him, I was still quite convinced that I had been drugged and that it had been some kind of a criminal activity because I was a writer and I had written some fairly controversial books, and I thought someone had broken in and tried to drive me crazy, essentially assaulted me.
Yeah.
But Hopkins thought it was an alien abduction, and I thought that was laughable. But he wanted to hypnotize me, and I said no. If I'm ever hypnotized by anyone, it's going to have to be someone who's a professional hypnotist. He proceeded to find the best forensic hypnotist in the United States, Dr. Donald Klein, who was the head of the New York State Department of Psychiatry and had 72 forensic hypnosis cases to his credit at that time, that where he had hypnotized people and enabled them to remember things like license plate numbers and things like that, that had solved crimes. So he had solid practical evidence of his efficiency. And I was...
Can't get better than that, I would
Right.
have thought, no.
And an excellent reputation and a top drawer position in the community. So I said yes. Privately, both Dr. Klein and I were kind of laughing at Bud Hopkins. We didn't think we were going to find aliens. Dr. Klein expected that these strange faces, that I'd seen these big black eyes and these peculiar faces, would turn out to be masks, and that maybe we would see someone without a mask and be able to identify them. I had already consulted with the New York State Criminal Investigation Division, and they had told me that without any evidence, they couldn't go forward because
a criminal report. Then,
there was nothing that we could identify that was physical evidence that they could hang on to. But if I had a description of a face, that would be a different story. That's what we were looking for.
Yes.
But instead, what
Not what you
happened in
expected.
under hypnosis was very, very different. You
Yeah.
started out asking about childhood. And when I was in the second hypnosis session with Dr. Klein, I suddenly heard him say, "How old are you?" And to my amazement, my voice as a child came out of my mouth, and I said, 12, my little Texas accent of my childhood. And I was absolutely floored. It was like my childhood, Whitley, had suddenly emerged.
And you had no recollection of that
None
at all?
whatsoever. None. And no idea that you could even have these. I thought I had had maybe one or two of these experiences. But Dr. Klein had detected a change in my tone of voice, and he had interviewed many people who had been abused or injured as children.
Yes.
And when he heard that change in the voice, he knew he was talking to the child. And that happened in my case unexpectedly to him and to me, and to Bud for that matter. And there emerged an experience from childhood that had happened on a train with my father and my sister present.
And this is during the day, or is it not like your normal experience, is it? Is this...
Not at all. No, I was, we'd been on a train, and then suddenly I was in a big room full of soldiers who were lying on cots. And this very thin, very strange-looking creature was moving among them and touching their heads with a little stick. And I asked her who they were, and she said they were all soldiers. And I was very pleased and happy to be there. But then I saw my sister and my father standing on one side, and I said, "Daddy, it's all right." And he said, "Whitty, it's not all right." And when he said that, in my memory, I felt a wave of fear go through me. And that was apparently the last time I saw the visitors as a boy.
Right.
Because
did your father have any recollection of anything? Or
I don't know. My dad died before any of this came out in my mind.
Ah, right.
But if Dad had recollection, and he may have, because his brother was involved in the Air Force intelligence and was involved in the Roswell incident.
Oh, really?
One of his brothers,
Oh,
yeah.
wow.
So
That is strange. That is very, very strange. Not strange
well, it
to me
is
because I'm
strange.
used to hearing
strange
it,
is
you
the
know,
right
but-
word. And I do remember my father taking me to our country house and meeting the visitors there, which I wrote about in a book called The Secret School. But how can a memory, I don't recall Daddy saying a single thing about it as a child. And I remember largely that there was a secret I kept, but I don't remember what the secret was. And it could have been anything. It could have been anything.
Well, how did that impact you? I mean, the floodgates must have just opened.
Not exactly. I remembered that, and I remembered something happening at a house in San Antonio, the house of a very well-known local lady named Eileen Carter, who was a bit of an eccentric, but wealthy, and had a house with an observatory on the roof. And I used to go to that observatory with her and look at the stars. And I remembered something about that, but it didn't seem to be connected with aliens. But I did remember going to a place in a wetland called the Almas Basin. And there was this big tree, and I wrote about this in The Secret School, that almost looked like an African baobab. It was a big, bulging tree. And I would go back into the basin after I remembered this. I went back to San Antonio and try to find it, and I never could find it. And one day I was out there with a man who had written a book about me. Ed Conroy wrote a book called Report on Communion. And a video man who was there with a video camera. And I was explaining, literally saying, the tree must be in some kind of parallel dimension because I've never been able to find it. 2 minutes later, there it was. I found it. And I cried out, "My God, here's the tree. I found the tree." And it is just like I described it. I have pictures of it. It's a huge old live oak that I was told was probably over 500 years old.
Oh, right.
And
Yes.
so if the tree was there,
Yes.
then the memories of going there and being taught about the universe by this, what I perceived at the time as a nun. There was an old sisters'
Yes,
home
yes.
nearby, a Catholic sisters' home.
Had to be
Must have
real, yeah.
happened.
Yes, must have done.
It must have happened. And that's the strangest part of it, because it just seems so improbable. And I don't have any direct memories of it. I put in the book what I thought I might remember, but it doesn't feel like a memory, like of a regular memory. And I just can't tell.
Very
But
strange.
but
yeah.
apparently I was involved as a child in some way.
Were you ever given any information as to why? Why you? I mean, is
Well,
any
I
reason?
can guess why. I always will do anything I want to do,
Right.
as long as I'm not going to violate the law and end up in jail. And I'm not easily dissuaded. In other words, I will keep on, especially if people push me.
Right.
If they push at me, I'm going to get very stubborn. And that happened. They started pushing at me when I came out with this. And the main reason I'm still here is they laughed at me and they called me a liar, and I'm not going away now. I'm not a liar,
Yes.
and there's no reason to laugh. So I'm still here. And maybe the visitors understood that about my personality, because
I'm so pleased we are you did, because you changed the whole aspects of the subject.
I did. I
You
changed
know,
it all,
You really did.
and it needed changing.
Absolutely. I mean, many of our listeners will know the very well known film Communion, and I remember watching that film, and it was not what I expected. It was quite fearful, and
It was very scary. What
it was
happened,
very
yeah.
scary. How original, how authentic is that to your experience? Because
You have to
people
read-
say, "Oh, it's just Hollywood, and they've added this and
Well,
they've added that."
the emotions in the film are pretty accurate. The special effects are weak because they didn't have enough money. The acting and the emotions are accurate. The book Communion is probably the best place to go to get an idea of what it was really like and what happened, because there's much more, of course, in the book.
Yes.
But if you want just the emotional situation, then the movie's a good enough
And
place to
Communion,
go.
the book, is it's just been reprinted again, isn't it?
It has been, and the audio is available in the UK.
Yes.
me.
The audiobook.
The audiobook is available in the UK through Amazon and Audible.
Right.
But the printed book is not, I don't think. I think there's another publisher here who has the rights, and they
Right.
still have their own edition out.
Well, over the years, you've wrote quite a number of books. 40, is it about 40? Around about 40
Oh, I've
books,
written
isn't it?
many books.
And quite a number of them, actually, I was surprised to learn, actually had reached our television screens. Over the years.
Yeah, they're movie screens, right?
Movie screens, yes.
The Wolfen, my first one, was a movie. The second one, The Hunger, was a movie. Then Superstorm,
That was Day After Tomorrow?
it was remade as Day After Tomorrow.
Yes.
It was made as Day After
I
Tomorrow
fully
as a
enjoyed
movie.
that.
Yeah. Then the Alien Hunter series was made as a TV series for the Sci-Fi Channel called Hunters, and there might be other things that I'm forgetting. But in any case,
Quite a lot.
yeah. And the one book, The Greys, they've been trying to make that into a movie for a number of
Oh,
years.
okay. Right.
And The Hunger has just been re-optioned for a new movie. And there's someone working on The Wolfen to make that into a new movie, too.
Well, then back in the days of your experience at the at your home, or say in the forest, the cabin,
Yeah.
times have changed a lot since then, and the acceptance has grown. We
Yes.
see a lot more things on television, but what was it back then? It wasn't really heard of.
No, I didn't know anything
It
about
was pretty much illuminated through your story, through your
Right.
experience.
I didn't know a thing about it when this happened. And after it happened, I didn't know it had happened. I was, at first, I thought an owl had gotten into the house because I remembered these big eyes, and I was very disturbed in the days that followed. I was very upset, and I didn't know why, and I had been manhandled quite badly, and hurt. I was physically
Yes, yes,
injured
yeah,
and
yeah.
very, very disturbed.
So it's not an experience you would want to go back to.
No, it was pretty
Relive.
violent.
I mean, some people have varied experiences. Some.
Oh yeah,
some not
subsequently
so
I've had
others.
my life with the Visitors has been very productive, but the first experience was pretty rough. I just didn't expect it, and they had, since they knew me when I was a child, I'm not so sure they expected me to be so surprised. I think that came as a surprise to them. And
Right.
because they eventually turned on this voice that kept saying, "What can we do to help you stop screaming?" It was a mechanical voice.
Oh,
And one
right,
thing that you
yes.
could have done would be to not turn on a mechanical voice that asks that question.
That would have been a good start. Yeah.
Right.
So those type of experiences, what did it leave you with any heightened intuition or a different awareness after your experience, or was it just really was an alien experience to you?
Well, over the years, immediately after I began to talk about the experience, and before I'd published the book, I was telling my friends about it, and one of them said, "Well, maybe it was out of the body." And I had never heard of that before. And I thought, how strange. And he said, "You can go out of your body." And he told me about this man called Robert Monroe,
Yes.
and who had this Journeys Out of the Body book. So I read the book, and I thought, this is fascinating. I wonder if I could do it. And one night I did get out of my body. And I floated out into the middle of the bedroom, which was perfectly conscious. I could see my wife sleeping and my body lying beside her. And I thought, how extraordinary, if this is real.
Yeah.
And then I went out into the front yard and glided through the window and through the part of the wall in the window into the front yard. And I thought, well, now that I know how to do this, I'm going to do it more. But I'm not going very far tonight because I'm not sure what would happen. I need to study this more.
Yes.
And so I went back into the house and I laid down, I kind of stretched into my body, and it was like mercury or something on the inside. It was very slick, wax. And I kept dripping, kind of falling out of it and falling down the edge of the bed. And I thought, my God, I've killed myself. What have I done? She's going to wake up beside a dead body with no reason for, no ability to find a reason of death. Poor woman. And then I was transported back in time to my front yard as a child, and there was my father mowing the lawn. And he looked up at me and he said, "When are you going to come help me?" And I was immediately back in my body. So
right.
it took the memory of
Yes.
not wanting to mow the lawn to get me back into my body. Toot sweet. But it turned out it wasn't something I could do every day.
No.
It was just once, and
Yes.
I've had it happen a few times since.
There's a process that people can learn apparently.
They can learn, but I didn't learn. I did it once, and then after that I could not do it again.
But at some point, you must have realised the physicality of your experience, because
that was
was you ever left with markings? I mean,
yeah, it was. Well, I don't like to talk about it much, but it still haunts me. And a needle was put into the side of my head, and now one of the doctors that studies this stuff says that part of my brain, the white matter between two parts of the executive functioning area of the brain, the caudate and the putamen, are unique in his experience, and he's been a neurologist for 50 years.
It's interesting you should say white matter. There's been recent discussions about white matter syndrome, which is the effects of close encounter experiences. And there's a doctor that's recently come out, a professor, who's been talking about
Gary Manolan.
That's the gentleman. Yeah.
This is who I'm talking about. No, I'm talking about his colleague, Kit Green.
Oh, Kit Green, yes.
Kit Green is the one who looked at my brain.
Yes.
I don't think Gary has looked at it yet.
No. And was he left with physical marks you could see on the body?
Oh, yeah.
Well, that's game over. You know it's a physical experience.
That was the thing that was so hard to accept. A serious crime had been. I had been very seriously assaulted, and there was also a needle mark in the side of my head, which I now wonder, is that what changed my brain? But at the time, I was going down the path of figuring out a crime.
Yes.
because it is a crime. It's a crime,
yeah,
no matter who
absolutely.
does it, actually. But it
Yeah.
started out badly, but I wouldn't trade my relationship with them for anything. Now it's turned out pretty well.
And it's obviously grown, and you've understood more as time's
Oh
gone on.
yeah, it's grown a lot, and I'm working on another book about them, and it's
Right.
called Them, imaginatively enough. And then I had previous books. I had A New World,
Yes.
and then I had, before that, Solving the Communion Enigma. And then back in the time when we were having a great deal of communication back and forth, there were 2 more books, Transformation and Breakthrough. So I've written about this a lot.
Yes.
And they, because they've been in my life, and they still are.
Yeah, well, yes. At some point, you would have learned that you're not the only person who's had those type of experiences.
Not at all, no.
It wasn't. It was back in the day certainly a taboo subject. Really was, and wasn't talked about very often. And even now, even in modern times, it's very difficult for people to have the support they need to have those, to
Yes.
be able to air those discussions, because it's not easy for people to
And-
talk about those.
And it can be
experiences.
dangerous if you have a career
Exactly.
and you
Yeah.
talk about, like, if you're a doctor or an attorney or something, a solicitor, I mean, can you imagine a barrister
Yes.
getting open about this and then trying to get clients?
It's career ending. Yes,
Yeah,
it
of
could-
course.
really could
It's
be.
very much.
Did you have the option to? Did you ever talk with Professor John Mack about your experience?
Oh, I knew him well. We were good friends.
And what did John say? What did John think about your experience?
Well, he was. He thought my book was terrific. He credited my book with communion, with
Yes.
enabling people to organize their own memories in a useful way. He was
Yes.
very supportive of my book, and I was very supportive of him. And when he went through all of that trouble with them trying to pull his license to practice medicine and to withdraw his tenure, he called me up and he said, "I'll be on the street." And I said, "It's not going to happen that way. The place to go, work on the tenure, because that's their strong suit. And if they withdraw their plan to take away your tenure,
Yes.
this licensing issue will go away."
Yes.
And he
I know he came under question.
right, he
Absolutely.
came
Yeah.
on. He turned the administrator who was after his tenure into a friend,
Ah,
and he.
a very good tactical move.
Right,
Yes,
and
yeah.
he did it. He did it by showing him that these were people in need, real need,
Yes.
and the man was also a doctor, and he couldn't deny that need.
No.
And John said, "If you do this, you will destroy their chance to get the care they need,
Yes, these people
and not only from me,
traumatized,
but from everyone in this field. And you can't do that ethically." And he withdrew his complaint about John. And the licensing issue went away indeed.
yes.
So, and I wasn't the only person responsible
It
for
was
that,
certainly a
believe me.
situation that was
But
illuminating.
many people were recommending that he do this, and it was a good move.
And what about implants and things like that, Whitley?
Well-
did they do anything like that with yourself? Or
I have a long story about that. This happened in May of 1989. We were at our cabin in upstate New York. I was lying in bed reading. My wife had just gone off to sleep. And I put my book down and was getting ready to go to sleep. It was a May evening, and the windows were open because it was a warm evening. And I heard the crunching of gravel in the driveway.
okay,
There's a gravel driveway, and I thought there were no car lights, and we had a big gate as well. And I thought, this can't be good. Now, you understand, here's the situation at this house. I had a bank of switches beside the bed that would flood the entire
Yes.
area with lights.
yes,
And there was an alarm system, and it was armed. So I felt pretty safe. Plus, there was a pistol in the drawer and a shotgun under the bed. Being a Texan, I knew very well how to use both of them to great effect.
yes,
So but the crunching of gravel in the driveway meant someone had gotten past the gate, and there were no car lights. Therefore, they were sneaking up.
Okay. Did the floodlights come on?
Well, no, they wouldn't have. You had to turn them on.
Oh, did you?
Yeah,
Right.
you had to turn them
so
on.
manually switched them. Okay.
It was manual, yeah. And I thought to myself, it's an invasion. Someone's come here, and this is not good.
Yeah.
And I went for the shotgun under the bed, and as I turned, I saw a man and a woman standing in the doorway of the bedroom, which was just beyond the foot of the bed. And I heard a voice outside say quietly, a male voice say, "Condition red." And it was all people. There may have been something else there, but I never saw anything clearly except people. Right. The man and the woman immediately ran toward the bed. Oh, before I was going to go for the gun, I was going to go for the lights. Then when I realized that there were people there, I went for the gun, but I was too late. I ended up lying on my side, on my right side. I couldn't see, I couldn't move, but I could hear the woman speaking very gently into my ear. She was saying things very gently and softly. And then there was pressure pressing down on my ear very hard and pressing my head into the pillow 3 or 4 times. Then it ended, and there was a big flash of light and a lot of crashing in the woods. I could move again. I jumped up. I grabbed the pistol, and I ran through the house checking all of the entry points.
Yes. Yeah.
And nothing had been breached. And yet this had just happened. And there was no breach, and the alarm system was still armed. So I ended up sitting on the side of the bed trying to figure out how lucid could a lucid dream be. Because I didn't think it had been real.
Yes.
And I went to sort of a half sleep for the rest of the night and got up in the morning and told Anne about it. And she said, well, I didn't notice a thing. And so we decided by that point that it couldn't have been real.
Yes. Yeah.
And I didn't have any sensation in the ear at all. Then I went out to get the paper, which I did every morning. I would drive down to it's a rural area, and there was a little store that had newspapers. And I would drive down and get the paper every morning. And when I opened the garage, there was a keypad in the garage. I was intending to disarm the alarm system. The garage door was wide open, and it couldn't have been with the alarm system still armed. So there's the alarm system still armed and the garage door wide open. I got in the car, and I thought to myself, I better call the alarm man because something's off here.
Not right.
But when I got in the car and started to back out, there was all kinds of static electricity in the car, and static electricity was bouncing off my hands, and I thought it's going to explode. I jumped out of the car again and went into the house, and I said, Anne, something is wrong. And I didn't touch the alarm system. Instead, I called the alarm man. He came over a little while later and found that there was a hugely powerful magnetic field in the garage. That was what the static and everything was about. And that it was so powerful that even though the garage door was open, the switches had not been tripped. But there was no source.
No source.
There was no big magnet anywhere. It was a magnetic field, which was a technological impossibility then.
Something would have had to produce it.
We've now got that, but then we didn't. So obviously, I realized that someone had been in the house. And then later in the day, my ear began to ache, and I reached up and touched it. And there was this thing in my ear, this lump, which I'm touching right now. And I was horrified. I said to Anne, they're tracking me. Now they're going to know everywhere I go. And she said, well, why do you care? I said, well, of course I care. She said, Whitley, what do? You go to the grocery store, you go to the movies, you get the paper every day.
Yes.
They'll track you for 2 days, 3 days, realize how boring you are, and they'll quit. I said, that's right. Actually, it's just us in our life. We have nothing. I don't go anywhere unusual. At least at the time I didn't think I did, but perhaps that's not quite true.
Well, absolutely. I mean, these figures you saw, are you saying that these were human figures?
They were people.
They were people.
They were people.
So
They
who was really responsible for this then, really?
There's a mixture of people and things that don't look like people in this. I don't know necessarily how that works.
I mean, is this from our side trying to find out where you're going? Or is it from them side,
everyone
trying to make
I've
sure
ever seen who had anything to do with the implant was a person.
Right.
We can go deeper into that because it's quite fascinating.
That's really interesting because we often think it's just the entities, the visitors that are just responsible for doing things like that.
No, there's people involved.
Right.
Absolutely.
So they're also interested in maybe where you go.
Well,
so
Anne wouldn't let me have the implant taken out. She wanted to see what would, if we could use it, and it would turn on every once in a while. My ear would turn bright red, and I would hear this buzzing noise. And eventually we moved to Texas, and we lost the cabin. And there was a doctor there, John Lerma, who was interested in. He was interested in this stuff, but I said I have this little lump, and he touched it. And he said, "Oh, it's a little cyst. I can remove that if you'd like." I said, "Sure, I would." And Anne was furious, but she went along with it at this point. She said, "Okay, we have an agreement now. Try it once, and if it doesn't work, leave it in." I'm sure she already knew it wouldn't work. Anne was a very strange woman. She was just the most nicest, sweetest, most down-to-earth person in the world. But she also knew how to handle all of this very, very well. She knew more than you would think. She could.
And was she right? She
was right. And here's what happened. Now, there's a documentary out from Travel Channel now called The Visitors, which is about me.
That's a new one, isn't it?
It's new, yeah. It's a 90-minute documentary, and they have the film of the attempt to remove the implant in it.
Oh, fascinating.
So it's not exactly a secret.
Right.
And you can see that the doctor tries to remove it, and they see a white disc, and then it disappears. And what happened was it went from here, the top of my ear, down into my earlobe.
It relocated itself?
It moved on its own. Absolutely. It moved away from the scalpel to avoid being taken out. And the doctor said, "Well, I'll have to take your whole ear off if I'm going to get rid of this." And by then he'd realized it was an alien implant because he'd read Communion, and it was clear that he had no intention of fooling with it anymore.
No.
So he closed up the incision on the top of the ear, and I went home. And 2 days later, I felt a burning in the ear, and it went up from the earlobe back up to where it is now, and where it has remained ever since.
Right.
After Annie, and I did not, at Southwest Research, they got a signal from it once.
Now that's really interesting because I am aware that signals have been coming from some of these devices. Some of them actually in the megahertz range, some of them in the terahertz range. What sort of frequency was this?
The lab was classified, and they couldn't tell me anything about it.
Really?
So 20 years passed, and suddenly I was doing a book signing in San Antonio, and two guys walked up to me and said, out of the crowd, said, "We were involved in the signal acquisition of the implant. We just want you to know it's the strangest signal that's ever been acquired in that lab, and it's still under study." And they turned around and walked away.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So whether that was a couple of guys just fooling around or the real deal, I don't know.
Well, there does seem to be a variety of different types of implants. They're not all the same.
Oh, no.
From what we gather. Yeah. I mean, I've talked on the show before about one that was retrieved during an investigation of a lady who had one of these removed from the back of her knee.
Yes.
She had no scarring there. She could feel the object.
Yeah.
And but it didn't show up on an X-ray. It showed up on a scan, though. And finally it was removed. It was a singular item. But the best analysis we could get from this is that it is quite biological. But it's foreign to the body. And of course, the body didn't react in a way it should react, if anything.
Something
in the body.
in the formation of the biology of it.
Yeah, so you've heard about the variations of different implants.
Yeah. Mine was a white disc, and that's all they saw. The doctor got a little corner of it, and took it to sent it to the lab, and the lab guy called him actually and said, "Is this a practical joke?" And he said, no, it came out of a patient. He said, because what I've got here is a sliver of metal with proteinaceous cilia coming out of it, and they're moving, they're motile, they're alive. So,
what does that mean? That it is partial. It is some form of
biological. It's a biological biotech.
Biotech.
It's a piece of biotechnology.
Yeah.
And I couldn't do anything with it. In other words, I couldn't make it do anything, and except it turned on its own and so forth. And then Annie passed away.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, everything changed. I noticed in my eye a slit would open. You could see through it, but it was like, and you could see words racing through it. And if I looked against a white wall, I could see the words, but not clearly enough to I could see the words, but they were moving so fast, I could only catch bits and pieces. And that would happen. And then Kit Green, Dr. Green wanted me to get a CAT scan of it.
Yes.
And I think, or someone thought, that he might want to try again to get it removed. And by this time, I was using it for research because however it worked, I found that if I just thought about something I needed to know,
yes,
the information would come to me one way or another within 48 hours. And it was becoming such a regular thing that I was using it extensively in my writing, and I still do. So it was, it turned out I did have a use for it. Then I went to get the CAT scan. I got the CAT before, and that was on appointment was on a Thursday. On a Tuesday, I do a meditation at 3:00 in the morning, and I started that after Annie passed away because they started waking me. Someone would wake me up at that hour by blowing in my face or tweaking my ear or wiggling my nose with, and I never saw them, but they were there because you could feel them touching you.
yes,
And it turned out that this is the time of day, that wee hours of the morning. It's called Brahma Muhurta time in certain yoga traditions.
yes,
And during that time, your mind is most open to learning new things.
yes.
And so that was when the information was coming in. So I was doing that, and I had written Kit and Gary Nolan and others about this, and he wanted the CAT scan. So but 2 days before the CAT scan, I was doing the meditation, and suddenly knock, 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 knock on the door. This very rapid knocking that I recognized immediately.
Yeah.
For certain things about it that I'm not going to say because I don't want anyone to try to duplicate it. And then I open the door, and it's not who I expect. It's some nudnik with a gun. But anyway, there were two men there whom I knew. I'd seen them before. And they're part of this. I don't know how it works. They're part of it. They came in, and they proceeded to explain to me how the implant worked and how those words were things being drawn up from my subconscious into my conscious mind, into the edge of consciousness. And he said it's like a muse. It's like your own muse. It's enlarging your information store, and that's why your research work is getting so good, and we don't want to lose that. And I don't want to lose it.
No.
So,
well, imagine it has its advantages to some point.
They left, and I have the camera. There's cameras all over the house, by the way. They turned off, and they always turn off when something like that happens. The cameras were off, so there's nothing on the cameras, of course.
Yes.
Then I got the CAT scan, and I was thinking one thing, that if that something shows up, I'm no way I'm going to get it taken out. Not after that meeting.
No.
So something did show up, but Kit said he thought it was a marker put there by the radiologist but I don't recall the radiologist putting anything there. So it could be that the CAT scan shows the implant. I'm not sure.
Right.
But in any case, that night when those men were there, he said a very interesting thing. He said that this had been designed by a man named Konstantin Raudive. And I didn't recognize the name quite. It sounded vaguely familiar. And but when I Googled it, I recognized it immediately. The name is Konstantin Raudive. He mispronounced it.
Oh, right.
And Konstantin Raudive was the scientist who did EVP, electronic voice phenomena, of connecting with the dead electronically. And I was telling friends about the slit in my eye and asking them all if they had that. And one friend said, yes, that's oddly enough, Whitley, I do. I've had that for years, and I've often wondered what it was about.
Well, that's strange.
He turns out to be one of the world's leading experts on Konstantin Raudive. So, and Raudive has said from the other side that he's working on technology from the other side. I think that this implant has much more to do with our own dead than it does with aliens.
That's a really interesting point.
Yeah. So it's a whole different ball of wax.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, I've talked many times about connections, about not to ignore the paranormal aspects of things.
No, it's absolutely
I believe
fascinating.
There's a connection there.
Yeah.
So this new documentary, it's called The Visitors.
The Visitors.
And what channel is that due to go on?
It's on the Travel Channel, or it was shown on the Travel Channel.
Travel Channel.
And now it's available for rental on Discovery Plus, and I think you can also rent it on YouTube.
Wonderful, because I'll be looking for that. It'll be fascinating to see.
Yeah, well, you see the whole thing. You see the whole removal attempt is there.
And what's in store for any further books?
Yeah, I have. I'm working on a book called Them, which is an analysis of how our visitors think about us and how they treat us
in general, or just about yourself.
No, it's not about me. I'm not. My own experience isn't part of it.
Right.
And this is really the first book about this that I've written that doesn't contain a lot of my own experience. But what I've done is I've taken some of the letters that we were sent and analyzed them very, very deeply to determine exactly what was happening and what the people were experiencing and why. Nothing like this has ever been done before.
Yeah.
And I've also gone into the whole military side of it and the secret side of it and what is amiss there and what needs to be changed. And
it sounds fascinating.
It's a completely different approach.
An eye-opener, as they would say.
Yeah, I hope so.
Use the pun.
Right.
But, I mean, there's not many people that are writing about that sort of thing, to be honest.
Not seriously, no, not deeply.
No. Well, I want to thank you, Whitley, for joining me here. I'm sure our guests were absolutely fascinating, as much as I was then. And we're probably likely looking out to tune into this new documentary. I'd love to see that. And I want to thank you for coming along today. And let's hope again that it's not too long before you're back in the UK.
Well, it won't be. I'll be back in May, probably.
Wonderful.
I'm going to come back to coming here 2 times a year because this is my second home.
Oh, well, that's great to hear. Oh, thank you again, Whitley, for joining us.
Thank you.